Benedict Morelli, and I'm the founding partner of Morelli Law Firm. We're located in Manhattan, New York, and I'm a trial lawyer first, and I've been doing that more than 40 years.
Let's go back before you went to law school, before you became an attorney. When did you decide that you want to become a lawyer? What was that about for you?
Well, for me, when I was in undergraduate school, I took one of those undergraduate law courses. My professor, who was a practicing lawyer, called me out one day and he said, "What's your name?" I said, "I'm Morelli." He said, "Morelli, you don't take notes in my class." I said, "Well, I listen and I read the text. I don't have to take notes." So he said, "Well, no one's ever gotten more than like a C+ in my course without taking notes." I said, "Thank you for the information." So I continued on doing what I'm doing, and when I finally finished the course, he asked me to call him in his office. But we didn't know what our grades were at that time. So I called him. He said he was going to leave my grade with his secretary. And so I said, "Okay." And then she said, "He wants to speak to you directly." So I said, "Well, this can't be good." So I wait for him nervously because I'm young. And I get on the phone and he says, "Mr. Morelli." He said, "You got a 94 in the final and I was forced to give you an A." I said, "Thank you very much." And he said, "Oh, by the way, you don't have to take notes, and you should be a lawyer. That's the way your mind works."
There's a term that I use, it's called the inception of purpose. And it's a term that I use to denote that point in life when you figure out, okay, this is that thing I was meant to do. For a career as long as yours, was there a point at which you said, "You know what, this is it. This is the thing that I should be doing. This is the thing that I'm going to do"?
Well, I applied for a job as a law clerk, and I did 4 interviews in 4 different types of law firms, 4 different specialties. And out of the 4, I got 3 offers. And the one I took was a personal injury law firm. And I hadn't been thinking about doing that at the time. And so when I started working there, I was working in the file room, and I answered the phones. I did everything that I had to do as a clerk, let's say. And after a while, I realized that I wanted to just be in court because they did litigation. And as a non-lawyer, I was given the responsibility over the lawyers in the office. They had to come to me for authority to settle cases. And so ultimately, I became a partner in the firm when I finally became a lawyer. And then I became the senior partner and I owned the firm before I left and started this firm in 1998.
As a personal injury lawyer, you're in such a very unique position to achieve justice for someone who needs it. But for you filling those shoes and filling them well, that person may go without that justice, right? Without that validation. Mm-hmm. How do you see yourself in that regard as somebody who's a harbinger of justice in a way that can give to someone what they wouldn't have otherwise?
Well, the thing is, sometimes you're not always representing someone who is poor, because I represented Tracy Morgan. He wasn't starving to death at the time. But he was entitled to get justice from Walmart. And when he and I met, I knew that he was in a position where everyone who was working for him, his publicist and his entertainment lawyer and his manager and all of these people, when he spoke, they listened. And I explained to him in his house the first time I met him, I'm not that guy. I said, I work for you in a different capacity. I'm retained as your lawyer. I said, because your team retained me after vetting many lawyers. I said, but here's the way it works. I tell you how it's going to be. You don't tell me. Otherwise, we're not going to get along. And that's not good.
Interacting with your client, how do you approach that client connection? How do you approach getting to know your client such that you can go into court and really advocate for them?
Well, first of all, I have to gain their trust. And you gain their trust by your confidence level. You know, when they meet me, I'm not wavering. I'm not kissing up. I just tell them, you know, I know what to do in this case, but you have to be comfortable with me. You have to trust me. You have to be able to tell me what you might not want to tell somebody. And I have to be able to tell you the way it's going to go. In almost every case that I do, for at least 20 years now, I have 100% authority from the client. I don't even have to speak to them to settle the case. That's the kind of trust level that I have. And if I can't have that, I can't personally represent them.
You know, one thing we talk a lot about at Hawkline is stories, right? There's nothing like a good story. You know, you've already shared a couple. The story is so powerful because as human beings, we communicate through stories, right? You call somebody, what happened? You know, last night I had some friends that whatever, I need some story. There's a couple stories I need to get right now. How important is a good story to the work that you do?
Essential. Most important. I just did a lecture on cross-examination and how you have an eye toward your closing argument when you're cross-examining. And I told a number of stories during that lecture because first I talk about what I think is important to know about the topic, and then I'll tell one or two stories on point of the topic. You cannot be a real trial lawyer unless you could tell stories, because it is storytelling. The story has to make sense. The jury, and you know, this understanding that many people have that jurors are stupid is a stupid theory, because they're not. And it's not only because of their education level or anything like that. They have what I call the juror's eye. They look at the case, maybe like you, but maybe even more than you initially looked at it. So they have what I call the juror's eye. And you have to be able to know exactly how to present to a jury. When your opening statement is a story. It's actually probably a number of stories weaved into one. Your closing argument is an argument, but it's more stories. You know, and everything you do is you're telling the story of what your client went through, but also who your client is. Who is your client? How old is he or she? What's their family like? Who were they before this happened? How devastating was it when they lost this child, let's say, if that happened, or somebody in their family died? And you have to bring it along in a way that makes sense Because jury has to follow it. And just because they don't follow it doesn't mean they're dumb. It means you're not telling the right story.
I like this point about them not being stupid.
They're not at all.
They come from so many different walks of life. Common sense to them it may be very different from the sense that we make as attorneys, but they're not dumb, and they can, if they sense something inauthentic, right, in the story that you're telling, if they sense that maybe you don't believe the story, or in the telling of the story there's something artificial, or there's something that's preventing them from understanding the story or understanding your client.
Well, and believing it, but there's a few things that I say. I spent a lot of time in my young life selling different things, sewing machines door to door. I mean, I did a lot of things in my life. And I have a saying that I teach all lawyers, and I speak to all the lawyers in my office. If I don't buy it, I can't sell it. And you got to know that. You got to stick to that. If someone comes to you, a client comes to you, and you think the story is bogus, well, you just don't buy it. It's a really tough sell. And you shouldn't be selling something you don't buy to begin with. That's not our job. Our job is to get justice for somebody. You can't get justice from a bogus story.
Some of these cases that you've dealt with over the years, I would imagine some deal with substantial grief and loss.
Yes.
How does that play into your own mindset, right? Some of us are ruffled by grief and loss. Some of us are not. I interviewed Randy McGinn yesterday morning, and she said, I was practicing for so many years, but it wasn't until my own husband passed away. And I felt what was a substantial experience of grief that I reoriented myself in how I told the stories.
I was very lucky. I've been very lucky in my career. Right from the beginning, I've had such varied cases. Approximately 20 years ago, there was a 5 or 6 page article written about me in New York Magazine. And after the editor of New York Magazine met me, he named the article, Benedict Morelli Feels Your Pain. And that's the way I always felt. I didn't need to be reoriented, okay? And I lost my father 20-something years ago, and that was a big loss for me. I have no siblings. So, yeah, feeling grief and experiencing it yourself is very, very unsettling. But to believe that I can't understand you or your story because I never walked in your shoes is a misnomer.
I think to varying degrees, one thing that I was an actor before I became a lawyer, and one thing that I think predisposed me to that was that I absorb energy, and some people do that, right? And if you're able to do that, then I don't have to have gone through it. If you're feeling it, I can feel it.
Yeah.
How do you relay that inside of the story of the client's life, who they were, what happened to them? How do you relay that, what you're experiencing, that they're experiencing, to the jury so that they experience it? What's the trick there?
Well, the thing is, you have to, when you speak to the client alone in private, when you have that opportunity, which if you're representing them, you have it pretty often if you want. You should take that opportunity to get to know them. And in that trust level that they have to believe that you know what's going on with them. Once you do that, and you are a feeling person, I've had so many people ask me, why do jurors respond to you so positively? You'll ask them for an amount of money and they'll just award it. We tried a case a few years ago, and forgetting about the numbers, because people like to talk numbers all the time. I have a lot of numbers to talk about, but it's not necessarily an indicator of how good you are. I asked this jury for multiple millions in the case, and they had and it was liability and damages. And they came back in 14 minutes with the number. Now, I can tell you that that doesn't happen unless the jury really, really believes what you're saying. And so when I'm summing up to a jury and I'm talking to them the way I talk to you right now. I'm just telling them straight up. And people say, why do they respond? Because I am them. I'm not better than them. I'm not smarter than them. I'm not dumber than them, hopefully. But I am them. And they sense it.
How important is it for a trial lawyer starting out, or at any point in their career perhaps, to keep a mind for learning and expanding their skill set as a trial lawyer? How important is that?
I think what they have to recognize, and I actually just lectured and I said the same thing, I'm still trying to get better. And I think if you lose that, because I actually don't do the same thing in every case. I don't have canned arguments or the same PowerPoint presentation or the same opening. Oh yeah, get me the opening from that case I did 4 years ago. That's not me. I would be too bored doing that. So I try to size up the situation that I'm in, size up the jury, and make a decision on which way I'm going to go. But I'm always the same guy.
A lot of times people say that they've learned more from their mistakes than from their successes. Is there a case in the course of your career that stands out as one where you really feel like you learned something that maybe changed things, or that really shook you in some sort of way? Is there a case that stands out that you learned a lot from?
You know, it's interesting because I really believe that this adage that you learn more from your losses, I don't want to experience that, okay? I don't believe in that. I believe that you learn from all of the experiences, even when you do great, or you think, wow, it was even better result than I anticipated. You learn from that, because how did you get it? Try to analyze what was it exactly that made them respond like that. You know, where I've asked for amounts of money in a case and I've had juries give me more. Why? You know, don't you learn from that? So the jurors waited for me and I spoke to them. I said, why'd you do that? You know? And so I don't think you have to lose, because that would be a pretty interesting thing. I don't think Muhammad Ali ever thought he was going to lose, and therefore he would learn how to be a better boxer, you know? So you could learn from all of these experiences. When I was a very young lawyer, I was representing someone who looked exactly like Mike Tyson, and I'm talking about his build, okay? And he was riding a motorcycle, and he had an accident. Maybe I was 35 years old or something. And he had an accident with a fire truck, unfortunately, okay? Try to win that case. So now, what he didn't share with me is that he had been convicted of a crime and he had served some time in prison. And so I didn't know this. And I was a young lawyer, so I didn't look him up or grill him on that. And when he was confronted with that by the defense lawyer, who actually did know, he said he was never convicted of a crime and never was in prison. So they proved with documents that he was. And his answer, after he was shown that he was not telling the truth, he said he forgot. He forgot. So now I took him outside. I had forgotten how small I was and how big he was. And I said to him, I should kill you. Because now you put your case in jeopardy. He said, you're a smart guy, you'll figure it out. So I went to the jury and I gave a closing argument and I said, before we talk about the real issues in this case, I'm going to talk about something that has nothing to do with this case. Do I think for 1 minute that my client forgot that he was convicted of a crime? That's ridiculous. Or that I believe for 1 minute that he forgot he was in prison? No one who ever spent 1 minute in jail or in prison would forget it for 100 years. I said, but let me tell you what was going on there. He was afraid to tell you. Because he thought, just the way this defense lawyer thought when he proved it, that you'd hold it against him and not deal with the issues of the case, but make him pay again for what he was in prison for. And I won. And so you got to think about what you're doing, sometimes on your feet.
Man, that's, because then in defense closing, they got to get up and they got to get up again and face that, right? You stole all this thing. Everything they thought they were going to be able to get up and say, oh, yeah, this guy's a liar. This guy's, you can't believe him. Like, what happened to him? He doesn't deserve what Mr. Morelli just asked you to give him. That's brilliant. I think to spend as much time as you've spent in those shoes, there must be something special to you about this work that you do. What is it? When you wake up, you're here, you're out in Vegas, you're out in New York, you're working hard, you're teaching. What is it about this work that drives you on a daily basis, that sustains you?
So many things. First of all, I still have the passion for it. I believe in it. And I also believe that there are so many people who don't have a voice, and you have to be their voice. And it's hard. And I like that it's hard. Because that's okay. Because I'm going to work hard. It's very difficult when you sit around and try to think about what you're going to do in the case. You could figure out a lot of it, 60, 70%. But then leave the rest open and see how it goes during the trial, because real trial lawyers are ready to go. They don't need to know every single thing that's going to happen because you can't. It's not possible.
And one thing that I love about being on stage, right? We did karaoke last night at the thing. We killed it. I took my whole team. One thing I like about being on stage is that you really don't know what's going to happen. You might trip over a mic stand. Somebody might throw something from the audience. You might forget the damn lyrics. But for me, and it sounds like for you, there's something that's alive in the moment, and there's nothing like it. Right? There's nothing like being in a trial and living in the moment and allowing what's going to happen. And then Brian Panish said yesterday, but he said, I teach my team, we do hard better. Not everybody's okay with things being hard.
Well, look, there's a challenge involved. You can't lose sight of the fact that you're representing a client and not yourself. Okay? It's very important. And you could lose sight of that sometimes, especially when you start believing your own you-know-what. So you got to stay focused, because everything in this world is about focus, discipline. When you're in front of the jury with the judge, you could be aggressive, which I am. I'll press a witness and say, are you sure about that? And not a lot of people will do that. They're afraid that the jury's going to think that they're too tough. We finished the case in in a small town in Illinois a few months ago, and we settled the case 4 or 5 days in, and we spoke to the jury, and the judge said, "Morelli, come on in here. The jury says Morelli's a beast." So I looked at him, and he said, "That's a good thing." Yeah, because I had cross-examined a couple of witnesses, and I wasn't easy.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, right? If the jury understands that you're standing between the client and them, and they understand that it's your job, to tell that client story.
It's very important.
They can't walk over to the client and say, "Hey, what was it like? Like, what is this witness going to tell me? Are they telling the truth?" They can't do that. And when you convince a jury that you're up there being a beast for your client, you're being a beast for a reason. And I think there's a difference, right, between loose emotion, uncontrolled emotion in a courtroom, and what you're saying, focus and discipline.
It
right?
has to be very disciplined, because sometimes the judge is going to give you a hard time just because he or she can. And you have to make sure that if you're going to take the judge on, you do it in a respectful manner, not angry, forceful but not angry, because that jury is watching you, and they always like the judge. They always respect the judge, even if the judge doesn't deserve respect, because they don't know. And so you have to be so careful, because at the end of the day, as a plaintiff's lawyer, you're asking a jury to do something. Award liability to my client and award money damages to my client. And I tell jurors in jury selection, I'm not here for you to love me. I don't have the time to get you to love me. And it's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is your respect, and I'll give you mine. So I'm never going to tell you anything unless I think and know it's true. And you should never tell me anything unless you think and know it's true. We're going to get along great. And they respect that.
If you had an opportunity to communicate a few things to all the trial lawyers out there that wanted to be better trial lawyers, and you can do that all at once, what would you say to them?
I say, keep working hard. Keep trying to get better. Make sure that you always know what your goal is when you're in court. Stay true to the theme of your case. Always have the same narrative from jury selection to closing argument. Never tell a jury anything that you are not sure is correct. Because once you do that, you've lost the ability to win. And so people always are told, they always tell young lawyers, you got to work hard. It's more perspiration than inspiration. And that's not true at all. There's a lot of perspiration and there's a lot of inspiration. But if you're not inspired and you don't feel passionate about it, go do something else. Really? And I was lecturing earlier, and I said, there are a lot of lawyers who get verdicts. They'll get like a good verdict, whatever the verdict is, however many millions or whatever. They'll get one, and they'll say, I'm a good trial lawyer. No, you're not. Okay? They'll get two. They'll believe they're even twice as good. Or three. Now, they might be good, but that's not the only barometer. And that's why you got to keep striving to keep doing it differently and better, honing your skills every minute. Every time you have a case, find out your theme of the case. Stick to that theme. Figure out the evidence that's going to prove that theme. Make sure you know who the witnesses are going to be. Make sure you put the witnesses in an order that tells the best story. Brian and I lectured on that yesterday, that the order, because he and I totally agree on that the order of witnesses is absolutely essential. And so that's what I would tell them, and that's what I tell them all the time. But trial lawyer is not for everybody, And everybody thinks, oh, it's so romantic. Well, it isn't so romantic when you're bad at it. It's not romantic. It's very, very depressing and disappointing and tragic for the client.
And on the flip side, if you are striving continually to be good, to be better, right? If you are continually striving, then it can be miraculous for the client.
Yeah, and you could keep getting better, but you can't do anything in any kind of profession without confidence and without you knowing who you are. Who's in the suit? Who is this person? Am I comfortable in my own skin? When you talk to the jury, they know if you're not, because they're sizing you up just like you're sizing them up. And as the plaintiff's lawyer, you're the producer, the director, the choreographer, the script writer, and although some lawyers would disagree with me, you're the star, not the client, because they see you more. You talk to them. The client's not talking to them. They only have a very small part in their testimony. The rest is all you.
A lot of times people talk about where their heart is, right? And you hear someone say, oh yeah, they really put their heart into that. Where's your heart most of the time, you would say? Would you say, is it in your work? Is it over here? Where's your heart most of the time, you think?
It's in my work, and it's in my family, and it's in the people who work with me in my office, because we're like a family. And Brian and I were talking at dinner the other night, and he was saying, I got good peeps. And I have great peeps. And he agrees with that, and I agree with his peeps too, because I've met them. So you gotta really feel comfortable, and you gotta be doing what you love. I have an expression about closing arguments, they call it the summation or summing up. And people asked me years ago, why do you do this? And I said, because most lawyers sum up to live. They sum up for a living. I live to sum up.
Doing what you love is so important, right? And when we're doing what we love, we do it so differently. How much do you love being a trial lawyer?
It's all I ever wanted to be. And I tell one story that I think sums it up. Many years ago, before 9/11, I was asked to be on a television show. It was a Fox show where we tried cases on television. And they picked a number of lawyers throughout the country who had had some fame to be on the show. And so, I was on the show, and after the first year, they fired almost everybody on the show and re-upped my contract. But the people on the show with me, the lawyers who were also trying the cases with me and with others, they would always ask me, what do you want from this? I said, I don't understand the question. They said, well, what are you trying to get from being on this show? I said, I'm getting what I want. I'm having a good time. And they said, well, don't you want your own show? And I said, I have my own show. It's called Law Firm. And it can't get canceled. Yeah. I'm still having a lot of fun, and I'm lucky enough to have great people in my office, and I now have my son, who's a lawyer in the office, and one of the partners, and I get an opportunity to be with him and teach him, along with many other young lawyers that I have working for me who are all like my kids. Yeah.
How do you look at your legacy? How do you look at what you're leaving behind you in the trail of Benedict Morelli?
I think that what I'm going to leave behind, and when I'm dead and they know I can't hear what the hell they say behind my back, is that I was a fair guy, that I was compassionate, that I never did to them what I wouldn't want someone to do to me. So when we, just for instance, when we fly in an airplane together, we all fly first class, or none of us fly first class.